My name is Pedro Castro Borges. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this online international conference on reviving construction industry in post-COVID world, and India Construction Week, of course. I'm going to talk with you about the social appropriation and application of corrosion and concrete knowledge in the face of pandemics and natural disasters. Now, we are living a very singular situation around the world, which is the pandemics. However, there are many things that are linked with the situation of the poor people. We need to fight against that. We have been doing that for many years, but we have not complete success. The idea of this presentation is to show you some of the things that we have been doing here in our place in Yucatan to make people to have the social appropriation of knowledge. As a global approach, there is a perception of the national and international community about the effect of teaching in the field of engineering. However, it is not only teaching. In engineering and in many fields, we have to have together the teaching and learning processes, and for that, we have modern methods for measuring knowledge appropriation. Starting with teaching, we have a curriculum structure. We have flexibility to guide students to special. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Pedro Castro Borges. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this online international conference on reviving construction industry in post-COVID world, and India Construction Week, of course. I'm going to talk with you about the social appropriation and application of corrosion and concrete knowledge in the face of pandemics and natural disasters. Now, we are living a very singular situation around the world, which is the pandemics. However, there are many things that are linked with the situation of the poor people. We need to fight against that. We have been doing that for many years, but we have not complete success. The idea of this presentation is to show you some of the things that we have been doing here in our place in Yucatan to make people to have the social appropriation of knowledge. As a global approach, there is a perception of the national and international community about the effect of teaching in the field of engineering. However, it is not only teaching. In engineering and in many fields, we have to have together the teaching and learning processes, and for that, we have modern methods for measuring knowledge appropriation. Starting with teaching, we have a curriculum structure. We have flexibility to guide students to specialize. This is with optional subjects. We have trained teachers who provide different teaching methods like group dynamics, or interaction with real problems. However, there are some inconveniences during the teaching process, and this is important to note. There is a lack of criteria for assimilating available information. There are lots of information available, but little knowledge poured into it, and a lot of confusion. This is the case of the internet. Unfortunately, you know that many of the things that are in internet contribute not to the formation, but only to information. There is also a very strong inconvenience that is the scarce basic information in teachers and students to forge a criterion during information analysis. And this exists especially when students and even teachers have had no contact with formal research. And formal research doesn't mean specifically the university, but also at prior levels, also during high school or previous levels too. For the process of learning, since my point of view, we have to follow three stages that are very important. First, basic appropriation of knowledge. We need to have an analysis of information and knowledge of databases, different and similar opinions of literature, creating one's own criterion with the appropriation of knowledge. After basic appropriation, the formal appropriation consists on generating knowledge. This can be through scientific research and as a part of student training since the bachelor's degree. But once we have the basic and the formal appropriation of knowledge, our problem in our developing countries could be the social appropriation of knowledge because the knowledge doesn't reach, for example, users in the correct way. For this, we have mechanisms. These mechanisms are generated or could be generated for the area community to appropriate the knowledge generated. I'm going to show you in this slide what I try to mean. This community from San Crisanto participated in a research, participative research, that included to take into account communities where we have farmers, fishermen, and people that don't know how to read, how to write, but they are intelligent people. And they are very interested in having some infrastructure and some economic activities to survive against disasters. Natural disasters as hurricanes, storms, health disasters, for example, as this pandemic. In this photo, we are observing people from this community without basic knowledge. They are practicing a corrosion problem. This is very important because they are obtaining the knowledge from a practice. A group of professionals tried to prepare together with them methodologies to appropriate from the knowledge. This is another photo with a part of the dynamics to get the knowledge with a good access for them. This community, after having all of these experiences, they were able to construct their own houses. This is a photo where members from different families were participating, making the roof, part of the roof of their house. So in this way, and with this knowledge, with this participative research, they were able to know what a cover of concrete mean, what a reinforcement corrosion mean, what the right dosage of a mixture is. And that was very important to know it, for them to know it empirically at least. Finally, most of them didn't know how to express their ideas, but the group of professionals promote them to use draws. And this is a typical draw of the type of house they needed to live. This is to avoid all the problems related with the storms, the floods, the hurricanes, and now these health disasters. So here we have the palafy or the steel house that finally we perform. Once I appropriate basic knowledge, I do formal research. I publish my results on high impact journals. They quote me by other researchers, and then what? Well, I'm going to tell you a success story. And this is a house, a steel house with durability and sustainability criteria. Sustainability and durability criteria were obtained by the people through the participative research. This is the community of San Crisanto in the north of Yucatan. The population is located on the coast of the country, 10,000 kilometers of coast face the effects of hurricanes and tropical storms at risk in their physical and economical integrity. Here are the effects of Hurricane Gilbert. This is a satellite image and the disasters in Port of Celestun and Port of Progreso. And this is the case of Hurricane Isidoro in 2002. This is a satellite image of the Port of San Felipe and the Port of Progreso too. The Palafire, the steel house, the first model, the first prototype was constructed just before the passage of Isidoro. And these are some examples of the floods in Mexico, recent floods in Yucatan and Tabasco. If at that time the government had a strategy to construct steel houses everywhere to minimize the impact, economical, physical, and human impact of the floods, we could have less problems than now. That at this moment, where all the southeast of Mexico is affected by floods. Here are other recent images of the disasters, recent disasters. And here we have the estimated data of the COVID-19 in Mexico. Now, by November 25, 2020. Fortunately, we have the vaccines coming, but the problem here in the Southeast is terrible now. But what was the origin of the Palafites or the steel project? In 2002, it emerged as an idea of the part of Simvestab in Merida in conjunction with the population. The idea was to use a rural housing model, but to prepare and to have the idea of this housing model with the people. And of course, with durability criteria, sustainability criteria, and try to adapt it to a steel housing. These are some photographs from steel houses in many parts of the world. A palafite is defined as a commonly built dwelling within a lake, river, or swamp on stakes or dry feet. This is the first palafite after the passage of Hurricane Isidoro in the village of San Crisanto. With this in mind, the objective, part of the objectives of this talk was to show you the experience of training people from developing communities to appropriate knowledge related with corrosion and concrete, even in the presence of poverty and illiteracy. So, after doing this, as I showed you in the previous slides, what was the second objective, which was very important, was to detect and record the influence of microclimates on the corrosion process of the palafite substructure based on orientation, height, positioning of the rebar, internal temperature, and humidity of concrete. I'm going to show you some of the results that were obtained with the help of the community. So they were able to empirically know when their house was in danger or not in terms of corrosion or durability. Here are the palafites, the first models. The first one with galvanized steel inside concrete, the second one with black steel. The models are quite different. And the palafite 3 with conventional steel and concrete. And the fourth one, from the fourth one, we have the prefabricated option. The prefabricated option let us decrease the cost. Of course, the participation of the people mainly was on the roof and some other parts of the structure within the construction. The palafite's design was based on the characteristics of rural housing in the state, as you can see in this specific one. And it covers the main needs of the inhabitants of the community. In the methodology, a basic description of this design was the reinforced concrete substructure, which was the base for our study to have the durability of these ones, because the substructure was sustaining the structure and it was confronted with the tides, high tides, with the impacts, with the floods, and of course now with the situation of the pandemic. So the families could stay at their home, safe, without risk with their properties, with their human lives, and of course, from the pandemics. The elements that make up it were prefabricated, and the design included moisture chambers. These moisture chambers were performed to obtain temperature and relative humidity data, as well as electrochemical data. In the characterizations, we try to measure every 2.5 or 3 months, and we use electrochemical and environmental measurements to perform. In the characterization, we use several studies areas in the columns and the beams. In these columns and the beams, we selected three positions, and we obtain results from them and also from the rows. We have several nomenclature. We are going to talk in this conference about some specific contributions of this study. These were the measurements, the apparatus to make the measurements of temperature and relative humidity. And this is the commercial corrosimeter, the G-Cor6, that was used to measure with the chambers and with the help of the community to have values of about resistivity, corrosion rate, potential, corrosion potential, and so on. Now we have the results. I'm going to show you the result carefully. This is the only slide of results, and then we are going to go to the discussion. I'm going to show you only the corrosion rate values. These corrosion rate values are in accordance with the others: humidity, temperature, corrosion potential, resistivity, and so on. There are three important things here on the corrosion rate that I like to show you. The first one is to note that there is a mixture of all the variables, so it is impossible to know the contribution of each of them if we are talking about the orientation, because the orientation is giving us the possibility to change some design variables on the palafite and to make it more accessible, more economic, and more durable to the community. So that was very important to us. And the second thing to observe here is that all the tendencies are flat. And that was very important, because the third thing was to note the dotted lines, specifically the red dotted line. That means the threshold between the passivated and the depassivated zones. And in this case, all of the values were below the depassivation zone. So we were not in risk of having corrosion, and the behavior of all the structure was as we were expecting. So that made us feel very happy, very, very happy until now. So the durability design was working. So what is the problem now? To have the contributions. So it is not possible with this representation, so we had to change. So now we are going to discuss the results in terms of the cumulative corrosion rate. The cumulative corrosion rate is going to show you the influence of orientation, which is the main parameter we are going to analyze today. The corrosion rates in microamperes per square centimeter per month. Let's observe here. We are going to analyze the heights in columns. The top, the average, and the lower height. The top height at 110 centimeters from the baseline, the average height at 80 centimeters from the baseline, and the lower height at 40 centimeters from the baseline. We can observe a consistency. All the tendencies are similar and beautiful. All the tendencies of the cumulative corrosion rate show us that the north upper height is always below the south upper height. The same happens at the top, at the average, and at the lower heights. And that is very, very, very interesting. We have on the south the marsh, and the marsh is producing a constant humidity, and for this reason, the time of wetness is higher than on the north side where we have the sea. Where we have the sea, we have tides, we have north winds, but we have very specific cycles of wetting and drying, and that is the reason why the time of wetness is less than on the south face. And we are being able to observe that very clear on the columns of a house and with the help of the community. And the community knows what this means, and they are learning how to protect their palaphites. If now we see the influence of the orientation in beans, we can see a similar trend. The difference here is that the south zone is below. We have no an explanation for this, a very clear explanation for this, but we suspect that this is because most of them, or all of the beans, are protected, are covered from the environment. So apparently, the influence of the environment is almost the same at any location. And that's the reason why we are observing very small cumulative corrosion rates, and it's not easy to find differences between the north, the central, and the south zone. If now we show the north zone, let's think about only about the north where we have the sea, where we have less time of wetness than in the south, where we have tides and where we have north winds. In this case, we have a very clear influence of the orientation. As you can observe here, we can see again the upper is, we have here the average, the height. But as we are in the north, we have a chance to compare east versus west. So let's observe what happens in the column at the upper part, again, at 108 and 10 centimeters, at the middle at 80 centimeters, and at the lower east part at 40 centimeters, all of them above the baseline. And as we can observe here, always the east part, look at this, the east part, the east part, and the east part is practically below the west part. The reason for this is that the time of wetness is playing a role here. It's not so different, but it is clear that the east part is having less influence of the time of wetness. That was very amazing for us because we can now know how to protect the north, the south, the east, the west, also how to play with the dosage of the mixture, with the position, with the concrete cover, with the kind of cover, with the kind of concrete, and then try to minimize the cost with the same durability of the project. If now we see the south zone, remember the south zone is the zone which is in front of the march and with more time of wetness. We can observe also the same difference. Look at that. The east part is always below, always below. It's not completely clear, but we are feeling that. So the treatment could be the one that in the north. The only difference is that in the south, we are having more time of wetness and then more cumulative corrosion rate, but the tendencies are the same among them. As conclusions, in terms of microclimates, they were recorded and they modified electrochemical activity based on the orientation, height, and position of the rebar. In terms of orientation, the southern part of the palaphyte or the steelhouse is more electrochemically active than the northern zone. And the bars located in the west part of the columns are more electrochemically active than the east side bars. Another conclusions, the elements of the steelhouse with the greatest electrochemical activity have been the columns, also above the beams. The lower height of the columns is more active as expected than the upper and medium heights because of the accumulation of humidity. It was also verified that in addition to microclimates, there were constructive details related to the placement of steel and minor repairs in the compression layer that possibly allowed moisture filtration and possibly influenced the expected electrochemical process. However, we were able to observe that in the mixture of the variables, but not on the tendencies. The tendencies were the same and they behave always in the zone of passivation. With this in mind, I would like to say you thanks for your attention. It is important for us to have into account that the knowledge generated must land with the poor people, with the unprotected people, with those who have not the same possibilities like us. To reach this, we need to have contact with them, to teach them empirically. And now we know that we have methods to do that. The participative research method is an excellent tool to reach it because we can do that the people, poor people without knowledge, could have empirically the knowledge and know how to apply on site, on their communities, this knowledge. Thank you very much. I apologize for my bad English, but I hope to have a presentation that you could understand and you can have or spread into your communities. Thank you very much.